But welcome everybody to this webinar, which is the first in what will be a series of webinars on implementation of next generation science standards with a focus on Earth and space science. And I'm joined here by John McDarris with CERC and NAGT, who's been helping you get in the room and be set up properly, and also Ed Robeck from AGI. Ed, would you like to say hello?
I'll just say hello and just comment about how pleased AGI is to be partnering with NAGT and CERC on this series. That the NGSS presents us with a really wonderful opportunity in the Earth and space sciences, and I'm very glad to be part of it with the others.
Thank you, and also with Aida Awad. And Awad, Aida, are you able to speak? I see that you're typing. I don't know if you're able to actually voice. Okay, Aida doesn't think she can. But we've been working on a set of activities to help the community move forward on Earth and space science NGSS implementation, and this is one of those steps. So let's see. I've got to move the slides. Make my way down to that little arrow. We're very pleased to see the vigorous response to this topic. We actually hit the registration limit, so that's a fantastic thing, and I hope we continue to see that kind of interest. The purpose today is to look at 3 examples of projects where learning resources have been aligned with next generation science standards and tagged and are being displayed for educators to be able to use those resources in different ways. The projects are all different and with different origins, different sets of resources that have come in to make their learning repository of resources. And I know that many of us are trying to navigate how to help educators use our resources. It's the next generation science standards is a wonderful vision of teaching, and one of the things it is not is a simple vision. And that brings in complexities for how we move forward in helping educators use our resources and communicate with them in different ways. So our presenters today are Kristen Wegner with the GLOBE project, and that's Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment. Ann Ager, who's representing Integrate, which is Interdisciplinary Teaching About Earth for a Sustainable Future, and Theresa Schwerin, who is with NGSS, and that is the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. She's going to be showing NASA Wavelength and how NASA's been moving forward on this. After the presenters show the work that their groups have been doing, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions about that, and maybe you can get some insight into how you might want to either access these resources or align your own resources for use by educators. And we'll also tell you about some future events that we have planned to further support NGSS implementation. Once again, I have to find this little arrow. Okay. So I asked the presenters, just as some food for thought, there were some questions that I know we've been tussling with in some of the projects I'm part of, and I thought it might be a common set of questions that we have as a community. So some of the things I asked presenters to think about, even if they didn't speak directly to all these things, was, what's the starting place for alignment? There's lots of different people will ask, are you starting with performance expectations? Are you starting with the disciplinary core ideas? Are you starting with cross-cutting themes or practices? And there's a case to be made for any one of those. So I'm interested in knowing what decisions were made. Also, what kind of trade-offs are there between being able to use these alignments and these resources versus the complexity of decisions that can be made about alignments? Are there lessons learned that the rest of us can learn from? Are there gaps in the resources that we have available to us relative to NGSS? Are there any areas where we have lots of strengths? And just in general, what are presenters finding about the ways that educators are using these NGSS-aligned resources? Each project is in a different state of the effort, and so each presenter may or may not be able to have an insight into some of these questions, but I think it's useful for us to just start having a shared conversation about how we do this. And then I'll show this again at the end of the presentation just so you can have these things on your calendar, but briefly, we've got a set of activities coming up at the GSA meeting and the AGU meeting, so Geological Society of America and the American Geophysical Union. So there's town halls, talks, there's a workshop at AGU. We're in the midst of convening a larger working group to support this and establishing more activities going forward. And there's also an email list that you can sign up for if you're not already on it to remain informed about those activities. So with that, I'd just like to welcome Kristen Wegner, and we'll start with our first presenter on the GLOBE program.
Great, thank you so much. Hello, my name is Kristen Wegner. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm delighted to present at this webinar today. I'm a project manager for the GLOBE Implementation Office out of UCAR in Boulder, Colorado. And I'm going to share some of the work we did as a community to align our resources, as well as discuss how we incorporated the alignment products on our website in the navigation search tool. So in 2013, two of our GLOBE partners, Marcy Seavey and David Bedlowski, received an NSF grant to develop an NGSS alignment process. And that included facilitating an alignment workshop, conducting a series of webinars before and after the workshop to reach out to our GLOBE community as well as people interested in using our resources. So in the fall of 2013, 26 GLOBE partners, trainers, teachers convened for a workshop in northern Iowa. And we spent 2.5 days going through each of the GLOBE protocols, learning activities, and additional resources to explore the connections between classroom instruction, protocols, assessment, and NGSS. We developed 3 rubrics based on Achieve OER that helped us determine the connections between the practice DCIs, the cross-cutting concepts, as well as identify gaps between the learning activities and protocols and what we would need to create or include to have it align or connect to NGSS. So here's an example of how each resource was given a score per classroom instruction and assessment, as well as the resource match list in the middle, and also the final product guide that we have up on our website. And the final product guide is a guide to connections between the GLOBE program and the next generation science standards. And here's the link on the bottom left on how to access that. We also went through a review process after we had all of the GLOBE community align that. So we again had 2.5 days in Iowa. Everyone worked really hard to go through the rubrics and to assess how close it was connected. And then we compiled all of that and had an open review process for a few months, and then updated it and made it into a connections document that's on our website. As I mentioned, we also had webinars before and after, and this was to get everybody up to date in the Globe community about NGSS so that when they showed up to the workshop, they knew exactly what they were getting into. And so we explored the different dimensions of NGSS, as well as discussed how Globe, in the context of Globe, can align to NGSS through case studies. Thanks for putting the links up there. And we also have a series of webinars that we conducted after our workshop for people that are not necessarily part of the Globe community, but are interested in either the process that we did or that are interested in incorporating Globe resources into their school districts or their states to align their curriculum to NGSS through Globe. I'm also going to show you the search tool that we have on our website in a minute. Because a big part of what we did, we also created a search tool so that you can find the resources on our website per NGSS tag. So let me.
Are you ready to share your screen?
I am. I was just going to ask for that. Yes, please.
There you are.
Okay. Okay, so this is our website. And to access the resources that I just mentioned, you can go to For Teachers, and then Teaching Standards. And from here, we have resources for both NGSS and U.S. state resources. And again, we have materials for teachers and schools, as well as for districts and states. And here's the guide to connections that I just mentioned. Oops, not logged in, but you can get to it from there. We also have the webinars here. Something's, and you just have to click on each of the different images. And something's going on with the images, but here we go. So you can click on that to explore each of the different webinars that I mentioned. Also, as I mentioned, the interactive part on the teacher's guide. So here's our teacher's guide, and we have the search tool. And so you can explore any of our protocols and learning activities by looking for NGSS on our search tool. And so here it'll show the DCIs, as well as each student performance expectation per learning activity and protocol. So let me show one more thing. And you can also choose to narrow it in if you'd like to just explore Earth as a system, NGSS, and from here you can see each of the different tagging resources. That is it. Can I pull up the last slide or get back to the...
Yep, give me a sec.
Okay. Here's my email. If you have any questions, if you'd like me to also type in any of the links to resources that I just mentioned, please feel free to let me know via this chat room. But I also welcome any questions about the process or any of the alignment documents. If you'd like resources or connections to that, I can share those with you too. So thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Kristen. I've got some questions based on what you said. I think we'll go through the other two presentations, and then we can start asking questions about what we saw. Let's see. Russ asks, what was the link to that for the teachers? I think I think, Russ, you're probably referring to the display link. To that tool for the teachers. I think that's the display tool. Oh, good. You've got that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Russ, if you look at that and it's not what you're referring to, please feel free to put that in the chat again. So with that, we'll switch over to Anne and see how Integrate's approaching this. And then we'll talk with Theresa and then see where we can draw some commonalities and some contrasts and ask questions.
Thanks, Susan. This is Anne Egger. I'm at Central Washington University, and I'm part of the Integrate team. And in particular, I'm the team leader for developing materials and teacher preparation. And probably not all of you know what Integrate is, and I'm not going to get into all of that right now, but I will say that we are developing materials for undergraduate classrooms that are focused on societal issues that are relevant to Earth, which is a lot of them. And I said we're tagging Integrate materials with NGSS stuff because, as Susan mentioned at the beginning, there's lots of different approaches that one can take. We are at the other extreme from what you just saw about the GLOBE program in that we're kind of just beginning this process. And I will also say that this is something amongst our leadership team. When I brought up the idea of connecting all of our resources to NGSS, they all said, great idea, go for it. So it was not about bringing the whole community together to do it. They said, you know the most about this, so you should go right ahead. So it's a little less structured than what you just saw. So our goals were to, or I should even say my goals that are shared, is that all of our Integrate activities and modules are searchable by NGSS performance expectations, DCIs, SEPs, et cetera, at the appropriate granularity, in addition to being searchable by lots of other things. And there's some clarity for the user how and why those connections to the NGSS are made. So the reality as of now is that it's very much a work in progress. The mechanism for that tagging is in place. It hasn't all been done for all of our published materials. And those visuals and the search tools for users are not in place yet. I really liked what GLOBE has together, but I'll show you what we have as well. The other issue is that our materials are really designed for undergraduate courses. They're not K-12, so the alignment is more for some of the materials are for teacher preparation, so there's a strong reason to align those. And then the gift workshop that Susan mentioned is about, in part, using these materials in the high school classroom, so there's some reason to tag them as well, but that wasn't the original design, or that these were originally designed for undergraduates, not. So they weren't designed with the alignment in mind. As I'm sure many of you are discovering, that appropriate granularity is difficult. It can be hard to see what is worth tagging when you say, well, all the science and engineering practices are used in this one, so is it worth tagging them with all? I think that's where some of the challenge is. Thanks, Susan, for that comment. Undergraduate is an important sector for changing earth science education, and certainly we hope that a lot of these materials will be used in classes with future teachers too, so making those connections is pretty important. So I'm going to go pretty much straight to the website. I'm going to show you what does exist in terms of the visual, how you can see those connections, but you'll notice that it's not standardized yet like the GLOBE one is. I'm going to show you the mechanism we have for tagging and how we're doing that tagging very briefly, and how it could work for searching, although that's not something that's in place yet. So, John, I think I can do this all. Oh, there we go. Okay. I want this one. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen here. This is one example of a published set of materials. I can make this a little bit bigger, I think. Just a second. Here we go. So this is an example of what we call a module. It has several units within it, and this is just the front page. And so there's a drop-down menu here for things that are addressed in this module. This is large scale. This is like 2 or 3 weeks of a class. So I started with the performance expectations as being the way to really get at what will students be able to do by the end of this module, because often the content, it doesn't align exactly, but that idea of being able to do something is well aligned, but included the science and engineering practices. So I will say this is not what we hope for the end product, because this is just me typing this in. This is not like selected from somewhere, but that's what we're going to eventually. So that's one visual. Some of the authors, if you go to a particular unit, some of the authors also made connections themselves in these. So in this case, they added some information about the connections to disciplinary core ideas. So this was at what the authors wrote in themselves. But again, still, this is just typed in and added, and it's not what we're aiming for as the end product. If we go to search, here, let me go to just the main page here. And so that unit I showed you was on the hydrologic cycle. If I just type in a search, integrate is being run out of circ. So here's that same unit that we just looked at. You get this little tag that's integrate developed. Here's one thing we're kind of aiming for. These are all the things that unit is tagged with now. I could narrow this search by all of these different things. The subject, the project that created it, information type, and there are many other tags here too, but hopefully one of these would eventually be NGSS, performance expectation, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what our sort of general search looks like. And again, these cover all kinds of projects, primarily at the undergraduate level, so they aren't all completely aligned already. The other thing I'll show you just briefly is a little bit of the back side of this. And so if I go, this is another unit from that same module, and this is the metadata and how we can access that metadata. So all of those tags are within this section called vocabularies. And so this is how I would actually, at the back end, tag those materials with the NGSS. So I can go to the performance expectations, and I'm guessing that none of you have these all memorized, similar to me, so you can hover over these and see which one to tag, and then find which one is appropriate. It's none of these, and go through this process to tag all of these different cross-cutting concepts, disciplinary core ideas, et cetera, and make those changes, and then that saves that additional vocabulary. So now when I go back to the page, you can see those vocabularies are added, and you would be able to search on that. So we don't yet have this sort of, we have the means of actually tagging those, and this is a process right now of, it's a one-person job at the moment. And I'm starting with the ones that are published and are most likely to be used in these teacher preparation courses. But then we need to figure out what it might look like on the front end and how you might actually have an entry point into these materials, either as a K-12 teacher, where you'd want to start from the ideas of the NGSS rather than just happen across them within the modules. So we have a long ways to go, but that's sort of where we're headed. And I think that's all I have. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Thank you very much. Theresa.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, hi.
Okay. I was going to start by sharing my screen. 1 second. And can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay. So, hi, everybody. I'm Theresa Schwerin, and I'm with the group called the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, and I'm one of the leads for NASA Wavelength. This is a digital library that was developed under a cooperative agreement with NASA. My organization, working in partnership with the University of California in Berkeley, who developed the digital library How to Smile, which is an informal portal for informal science educators. We worked in partnership to develop NASA Wavelength, working with other groups funded by NASA, such as Space Telescope Science Institute and McCrell. And what you could probably surmise by our title, NASA Wavelength, the full spectrum of NASA resources for Earth and space science education. Our scope covers Earth system science and all of the space sciences, so planetary sciences, astrophysics, and heliophysics. And our audience is educators from K-12, higher ed, and out of school time. So we launched NASA Wavelength in 2012, and at that time our decision was to align to AAAS benchmarks. At that time, the next generation science standards were still being developed, and benchmarks were stable. So we aligned to the benchmarks. We developed the process for developing the metadata and doing the alignment was a year-long process, from developing the metadata, developing the process for doing the alignment, and then actually tagging and doing the alignment. And so the process that we developed, we needed to develop a process for a distributed team working across 4 broad science areas. My group covered Earth sciences, planetary sciences was covered by McCrell, astrophysics by Space Telescope Science Institute, and heliophysics by UC Berkeley Space Sciences Laboratory. And so we had, for each group, we had a cross team that worked across to make sure we had common training across those 4 areas, and we had a common understanding of what it meant to align these resources. So we developed a process. We had an online forum because, as you can imagine, there were lots of questions that came up as we went along. And we had regular tag-ups throughout this process. So as a result, we aligned over 2,000 resources to AAAS benchmarks, and now we're at the beginning of looking at next-generation science standards. And we've added next-generation science standards to our cataloging system, and we use the NCS, the NSDL, National Science Digital Library cataloging system. So we've added it to our cataloging system, and we've had several conversations about how to go about the alignment, but also thinking about how is a teacher going to search and find resources. And as you all know, it's not simple. They're a lot more complicated, and saying something is aligned to NGSS, it's not easy, especially with a collection that was not designed for next generation science standards. We have people who are starting to develop things that were designed with NGSS in mind, and we have several things that could support next generation science standards, but it really would take a teacher pulling together several resources to do that. So what I wanted to do is just briefly give you a tour of Wavelength and show you some of the tools that we have right now that a teacher can use to find resources that could support NGSS, and our list-making function, which allows teachers to create their own collections within our resource. And that list-building function really is one of the things that we think are going to be key to how we actually display and allow teachers to browse and find resources related to next generation science standards. So I'll start with the home page of NASA Wavelength. And when you come to the home page, one of the things that we want people to see right away are lots of ways to get into the collection and to bring things out into the daylight. And the first thing we want people to do is to register. And it's a very simple process. You can either register using your social media accounts or using an email address. And we don't share information with anyone. We just have a simple registration process. And once you log in, you registered and you log in. Yes, it gives you access to extended functionality. And that's where the list building will come in that I'm going to show you. So this, I've logged in, and it just starts with my profile. And go back to the home page, and you'll see we've got banners that rotate between 4 banners, and we try to connect our resources to current events. See Earth Science Week, which was last week, and we've got a lot of evergreen resources to support Earth Science Week. You can see how you can browse a collection by audience or by broad topic and by keyword. And if you scroll down to the middle part of our screen, our audience bubbles as you mouse over it. It lets you know how many resources in the collection are related to that audience level. And then on the right side are featured lists, and these are lists created by users of Wavelength. Whenever you find a resource you want, you can add it to a list. In our list, you can add outside resources as well. They don't add them to our collection, they're just added to your list. So you can go in, here's some featured lists. Just open one that Cassie Soping, who's online, created related to high school Earth and Space Science standard. Bundle of resources related to the performance expectation in weathering climate on analyzing geoscience data and the results from global climate models. So there's a space at the top where you can put whatever notes you want describing your list and add items to your list. You can see items that are not part of Wavelength have a little icon. We thought it was important to give our users the ability to create lists that have a variety of resources. Our collection is a reviewed collection. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. It is a reviewed collection that's reviewed by scientists and educators before items are added to the collection, and these are all resources that were funded by NASA's Science Mission Directorate. I'm going to go back, and you can also share your list through your social media. So one of the underlying philosophy of everything that we're doing with Wavelength is to enable educators to create their pathway that makes sense to them through this collection. So I think you'll see some of these features work towards that goal. We also include featured resources, so it rotates through 40 different resources, so to, again, bring those things out into the daylight so people can get a sense of what's in this collection of over 2,000 resources. And then at the bottom, we connect to the broader NASA family of multimedia, Science News Feed, and our blog. And our blog is where we have articles that give tips on how to use Wavelength, on where we'll be doing a series of articles related to next generation science standards coming up in the next several weeks, and helps to expand upon how to use the resources in the collection. So if I go back and just very quickly show you when I go in to the collection, one way, we've got a very powerful search engine, so using the keywords, you can put in keywords related to the DCIs and find resources related to those pretty quickly. So if I put in water cycle, it brings up search results, and we've got several filters down the left side of the page where you can filter it further by audience level, by topic. And one of the things that you'll notice is anywhere you see a question mark, if you click on that, it gives you more information about items. And what's important to note about the topics, these expand as you drill down into it. So, for example, earth processes, as you open that, you can see additional topics, including things like climate, which have a strong relevance to next generation science standards. They're very well represented in the new standards. Other topics, engineering and technology, the nature of science. These are all topics that are good starting points for teachers looking to find NGSS resources. We have the resource type, things like data, activities that are very, very heavily used data are a good starting point. Learning time, materials cost, and instructional strategies. So another tip that we give for finding resources that are more NGSS-like, under instructional strategies, you can search for things like inquiry, problem-based learning, project-based learning. Those are all things that are more likely to bring up resources from the collection that can support next-generation science standards. So the list building, again, results are up at the top, and you can add filters and take away filters. But one of the things that I wanted to point out that we see as when you see an item that you want to add to the, that off. I wanted to go to a specific item. You can add it to a list. If I click on this, it'll bring up a dialog box, and I can add it to an existing list that I've created. And I've got one on middle school weather and climate that I've created. I can add it to that. I can add these annotations, and that's where a teacher can talk about what strategies they would use with a collection of resources they've pulled together. And then when you go to, you can either go directly to the resource, or you can find out more information about the resource. And here's another place where NGSS is starting to show up in our collection. Very few things are tagged with this, but on the search results page, you'll see description. Again, you can add things to lists from here, more information down the left side in terms of the topics and the resource type. And then on the right side, you can share through social media, and then a box on standards and assessments. So as you mouse over these, it gives you the full text of the benchmark or the standard. And what we also do, so I'll just show the AAAS benchmark, and so it's got the benchmark text. And what we did with the benchmarks, because the collection also at that time, not many things were designed for AAAS benchmarks. So we looked at the alignment strength, and we made a call in terms of how strongly the resource aligns to that benchmark and what the focus of the resource is. Does it mostly focus on the benchmark, or does it focus on several things? So you'll see whether or not it's less than 50% aligned, more than 50% of the benchmark is covered, or 100%. So that's what we decided to do with that. And anywhere that you see a link. If you click on that, it will find everything in the collection related to that link. The next generation science standards are not quite there with that, but the benchmarks are. And so, for example, what those will take you to is AAS Strand Map Service. And I know I'm talking probably way over my time. I just want to very quickly talk about the strand maps. They're another way to get in and find things related to next generation science standards. In this case, the strand map is hard to see on a small display, but if you're familiar with the Atlas of Science Literacy, these are the online version of it, and they were designed by NSDL, and we customized it for our NASA collection. So there's a little box in the right corner that you can drag around. Down the left side are the grade bands. At the top are subtopics within this particular map is on weather and climate. And this is a good starting point to find things related to next generation science standards. And you'll notice next to each benchmark there's a colored box with a number, and that tells you how many items in the collection are related to that particular benchmark. So if I click on one of the benchmarks, it brings up a list of resources in the collection related to it. And you'll notice, not in every case, but NSDL hired a consultant last summer, I believe it was, to do a crosswalk from AAAS benchmarks to next generation science standards. And it's not a perfect system. Some things have a much tighter connection than others, but it's another place where you can find connections between the benchmarks and next generation science standards. So what we see going next, creating these lists and related to different performance expectations, and in the list building, having an enhanced capability. We're looking at sort of the next generation of our list making, where we would have drop-down boxes where if I created a list related to a specific performance expectation, I could select that performance expectation from a drop-down menu and also select DCIs, cross-cutting concepts, and practices. And so those would be related to my list, and we would provide a browse function. So at a top level, the ability to browse all the lists that are related to a specific performance expectation. We've got a ways to go. We'll have the capability in place fairly soon, but we still need to think through how a teacher would use that and browse and find resources. So I'll stop. I think I went well over my time.
Thank you, Theresa. Well, I think it's fantastic. I learned a lot. I knew from the outside of everybody else's projects that things were going on, but I didn't necessarily know how much or to what depth. And I just want to applaud all of the projects and presenters and people who have been involved in putting these alignments together. And I think there's a couple of there were a couple of questions that came up in the chat, a couple of ideas that came up in the chat. And then also for anybody else who's on the phone who has questions for the presenters, if you could please type those into the chat, we'll try and get presenters speaking to them in the 15 minutes that we have left. So one question was, have alignments been reviewed externally, and I'm not aware of anybody who's done that yet. Had some sort of external review for how we're displaying and aligning our alignments. Can any of the presenters speak to that, or do you know of any instances where that's happened?
This is Kristen. I could speak to that. We had an internal, Globe community review, and then we had external reviewers. So again, Marcy CV and David Bydlowski were both on their state review committee when the NGSS was being drafted, and so they had people from their state review it. And we had other folks that were part of the NASA EPO group that are not necessarily part of Globe, but part of this larger network of education and public outreach, and they provided a review. But we did not go out to Achieve or any of the other institutions and have them do a review of it, but it was people that were not part of our network and not necessarily familiar with Globe resources that did provide a review. And we incorporated their feedback into our alignment.
Yeah, and I think that's very similar to how many digital collections have gone forward. There's a review. It's not necessarily standardized,
Right.
It's different groups, and so that's very similar to how other things have gone. Anybody else?
One more thing on that. We also got feedback that because of the timing of the grant, we just implemented it in 2013 and the beginning of 2014. But had we done it, I think even this year, we would have done it differently. So we did get feedback that we would have incorporated into our process, especially including the rubrics and the way we did the alignment process.
Right, and I'm very impressed with all the training that you did with your reviewers and making sure everybody's on the same page. Let's see. So there's questions in the chat about that people can look at. There was another question that Ed brought up. We know that none of these resources were designed for NGSS. And none of our collections were developed for NGSS. And so, but nonetheless, they represent a giant investment by the community and by our agencies. So how have you found the process of either tagging first with performance expectations and then the 3 dimensions, or tagging at the 3 dimensions level, which is complicated? There's lots of them. So can you speak to going from one direction to the other, or some of those decisions?
So this is Anne. I can say a couple things about that. And I typed a little bit of this in the chat. I mean, one of the things that I think is useful at the summit meeting in April was hearing from the folks there about, the performance expectations that are in the NGSS they're like just a limited number of possibilities that could be created from the disciplinary core ideas, practices, and the cross-cutting concepts. So, I think it's useful to tag materials at whatever level is appropriate, and if they're just addressing the disciplinary core idea. Another project that I'm working on that I work with Vision Learning it's just readings, or there isn't as much interactive. It's not like a lab or something. So it's useful to tag those with disciplinary core ideas and science and engineering practices when they come up. But I think of it as a way to help educators see how they could put that together with other stuff to create a performance expectation. So I think ideally we integrate our materials are actually more focused on that performance expectation level. So it's appropriate to tag them first there. But also there are some materials that are at a smaller granularity that could help people put together their own performance expectation.
Right. Because the performance expectations aren't written in such a way that you've done exactly that to get there. They're giant expectations, and the expectation is that over the course of instruction, you've been using all the practices, you've been using all the cross-cutting themes, you've been using a broad range of disciplinary core ideas so that your students are able to achieve those performance expectations when they have them. They're more of an assessment item. So right. Good.
This is Kristen. One of the exciting parts about NGSS for GLOBE is a lot of our GLOBE teachers and GLOBE students don't just do one protocol or one learning activity, that it really fits into an entire suite around an investigation area. And so that entire process is really exemplified in the practices of NGSS. And so at the end of our project, we also, Marcy CV created an entire model, and I tend not to show it because it's kind of scary to people that aren't familiar with the GLOBE student investigation process, but it's a GLOBE model for student scientific research, and it's aligned to all of the practices and then where the protocols and learning activities would fit in that entire process. Because we know that it's not just one-to-one connections, but it's rather the entire process and how it fits together for the learning experience.
That's right.
And this is Theresa. Part of our rationale of creating lists that can be browsed by performance expectation is, one, we believe that's how teachers are going to want to find things, but also, as you had noted, it's going to take a variety of experiences to get to a performance expectation. It's what a student is expected to do at the end of instruction. So that's why tagging lists with performance expectations is one thing that we're looking at. And it makes for a simpler search functionality as well.
Mhm. Right, because that's the other big thing to consider is how do you display these things when they are tagged with lots of different things, and that's one of the complexities. Does anybody on the call have questions for the presenters that have not been alluded to yet? And Aida is making a good point that it may be easier to find things by DCI and by performance expectations, but it's harder to find things that are searchable or findable by practices and cross-cutting concepts. And also, those don't really lend themselves to crosswalks from standards we've been used to using. That's a human judgment for every single resource. Do any of the presenters have things they'd like to call out about that? Practices. I understand, Kristen, that all of the GLOBE stuff is working with scientific practices of some sort.
It's a great point. And the DCIs are probably the easiest way of those three to tag things. And one of the things that we also talked about in terms of ways to do an alignment is to maybe set the bar, since these were not designed for NGSS, that for an item to be individually tagged as NGSS, that it must support at least one DCI and either one practice or one cross-cutting concept. And so that was one thought about that.
So I'm wondering, we only have a few more minutes. I'm wondering from people who are engaged in this kind of work, trying to make their resources findable, trying to make decisions, do alignment. If you could just wave a magic wand and get information from everybody else who's doing this kind of work, what would you want to ask each other? I mean, what would be useful as a next step for all of us trying to work together?
Well, I guess this is Anne again. Thinking about the external review that came up, I suppose it would be helpful to have a network of people that are experienced in this that could review or at least give us a sense for, are you doing it in a useful way, or, is the granularity correct? So a review group.
A review group, a place where you can get some feedback on the decisions you're making, a place where you can talk through problems that you're having as you move forward.
Sure.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And Lisa has a great question too. What do you do with resources that aren't really aligned? That's a great question. Because we didn't have a magic crystal ball that said what NGSS was going to have. So did anybody find that so far? Did anybody find something that just was not aligned? And
yes.
Absolutely.
This is Kristen again.
Okay.
We found a few resources that I don't remember off the top of my head, but we added that as part of, it's one another chart that we have of the resources that we have that aren't aligned. And so we had, again, at the end of the project, we created recommendations about how to fill that gap, like if it included another part of the learning activity, or if it was included a little bit more certain different areas. We provided feedback about how to fill that gap. The part that, I wish we had, I hear some kind of echo. But yeah, I think it would be nice to have some type of plan to use these resources and to either incorporate them into teaching boxes that I know Lisa does, and they're fantastic, and a way to incorporate them into a bigger curriculum, and or build on what we have and fill those gaps so that they are aligned.
Right, and I'll also point out that, as amazing as NGSS is, there's not enough space to put every single linking concept that you might need in order to go from one set of performance expectations to another. There's a lot of building blocks within that aren't called out specifically, but are still useful. So I think that there's work and learning progressions that also needs to happen. Let's see. I also want to call out Randy's comment that another thing that would be useful is evidence for how teachers are searching. I don't know if we have that, but it's certainly a need. One of the purposes of these kind of webinars is to pull out these kinds of next action items that we as a community can try and make happen, because I think we can say, oh, there's not enough money, there's not enough time, and that is absolutely true. But if we don't know what each other thinks is useful, we don't know what to try and get. So with that, I want to, we only have a couple more minutes. I want to thank our presenters very much for being brave and initiating this conversation and with us, and having this conversation, and just showing all the different approaches that we can take, because we all stand on the shoulders of giants and those who have gone before, and so that's fantastic. I want to thank you, and I also want to again remind people that there's more opportunities coming up at upcoming meetings. And then if you are not already on this email list, I wonder if somebody can cut and paste that, John or Aida or somebody can cut and paste that into the chat. Thank you, John. If you're not on that, please do sign up, because as we do more of this and we have more informal meetings where you can speak and not have to type, that kind of thing, that's where you'll be informed about what are the next steps. So with that, thank you very much. If you have any questions about what we've been doing, or suggestions for how we can support this effort going forward, please feel free to contact any of us. I put my phone number there in case you all want to call me, and we'll just move forward together, because this is the biggest opportunity we've had in decades to support Earth and space science education and science education generally. and it's up to us to make the most of it.
And this is John. I'll chime in just right quick. We'll be posting the slides and the video of the webinar on the website. So if you want to go back and look at part of it, or if you have friends who couldn't make it, you can direct them there, and they can get the whole thing.
So watch this space. Thank you. Everybody have a great rest of your afternoon and evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan, so much for bringing this together. It's a big problem. I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Getting a lot of
Theresa.
perspective.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Kristen and Ann.
Thank you very much.